At its peak, Detroit wasn't just the motor city, it was the engine of America's middle class. Wages could be $5 a day, and the city drew nearly 2 million people into booming neighborhoods. But that remarkable rise hid a fatal flaw. Almost every dollar turned on the auto industry's gears. What happens when a city's prosperity is built atop a single, fragile foundation? The answer isn't just collapse. It's a carefully engineered unraveling, decades in the making. Here is how Detroit's downfall was set in motion long before anyone saw it coming. Inside the Ford plant, the air was thick with heat and the clatter of machines. On a morning shift in 1950, a line worker named Walter clocked in, grabbed his gloves, and joined a river of men streaming toward the assembly line. His father had come from Alabama for the same promise: a steady job, a house on a quiet street, and a future that stretched farther than any cotton field. Detroit was swelling with people like Walter. The city's population had soared to nearly 1.85 million, making it the fifth largest in the country. Newspapers ran hiring ads boasting of factory jobs that paid $5 a day, wages that doubled what most Americans could hope for. Men and women arrived from Mississippi, Poland, Kentucky, and Ontario, drawn by the hum of the Big Three: Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, whose names were stamped on paychecks and dreams alike. Whole neighborhoods sprang up around the plants. Bungalows in Dearborn, tidy duplexes in Highland Park, blocks lined with corner bars and diners that filled up after every shift. The auto industry didn't just offer work, it built a new kind of middle class. Union contracts meant health insurance, paid vacations, and enough security to buy a car made just down the road. On Saturdays, Walter's paycheck paid for groceries, a new suit, and maybe a night out downtown. Every dollar he spent rippled through the city, feeding shops, schools, and City Hall's tax rolls. Detroit's confidence was visible everywhere, in the crowded sidewalks of Woodward Avenue, the new schools rising on the edge of town, and the endless line of Chevrolets, Dodges, and Fords rolling out of the factories. In 1950, the city felt unstoppable. For families like Walter's, the future looked as solid as the steel frames they built by hand. The Motor City was the American dream on four wheels, and nobody imagined the engine could ever stall. Detroit's prosperity looked unbreakable, but beneath the surface, the city's future rested on a single foundation. Almost every paycheck, every mortgage payment, every tax dollar that filled City Hall's coffers could be traced back to the auto plants. The Big Three did not just provide jobs, they powered the entire city's financial machinery. When a worker like Walter spent his Saturday wages, the money cycled through local shops, into property taxes, and back into schools, streetlights, and police patrols. The city's budget rose and fell with the fortunes of Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. Unlike cities built on a mix of industries, Detroit's tax base was stacked on top of the auto industry's payroll and real estate. The factories themselves paid massive property taxes. Neighborhoods of bungalows and duplexes filled with auto workers underpinned the city's residential tax rolls. Local businesses, bars, diners, hardware stores thrived or withered depending on the rhythm of the assembly lines. Even before Detroit introduced a municipal income tax in 1962, the city's fiscal health was inseparable from the health of the plants. When auto wages rose, city revenue surged. When plants cut back, the effects rippled through every department and every neighborhood. This kind of single-engine economy created a sense of security that was, in reality, a hidden risk. The city's infrastructure, roads, schools, water systems, was built for a population and a tax base that only the auto industry could support. If that engine ever sputtered, there was no backup. In the 1950s, no one spoke openly about the danger. The factories were humming, property values were high, and Detroit's leaders saw no reason to question the source of their prosperity. But the numbers told a different story. Municipal revenue maps laid over factory payrolls revealed an almost perfect overlap. Detroit's fortunes were tied to a single gear, spinning faster and faster, with no safety net beneath it. The city became the textbook case of a mono-industrial economy. When the Big Three made decisions about hiring, automation, or plant locations, the consequences landed not just in paychecks, but in city budgets and public services. Every new model year and every shift change shaped the city's financial reality. Detroit's confidence was built on steel and rubber, but its vulnerability was quietly growing, measured in the same dollars that once made it rich. Rows of new houses stretched out across the farmland north and west of Detroit, each one built with a government-backed mortgage and a fresh coat of optimism. After World War II, federal policy turned home ownership into a mass movement. The GI Bill and FHA loans gave returning soldiers and their families access to low-cost mortgages if they wanted to buy in the suburbs. Bankers and realtors, following the rules, steered that flood of credit outward, where new subdivisions rose faster than the city could count them. In 1950, the city's population peaked, but the real growth was at the edges. Livonia, Warren, Southfield. These were not just bedroom communities, they were built to siphon off Detroit's people and prosperity. The highways made it possible. By the early 1950s, the Edsel Ford Freeway, later called Interstate 94, cut a fast line across Detroit, linking factory gates to new ranch houses on the city's edge. The Lodge Freeway, M10, opened up the northwest, pouring commuters into Southfield and beyond. The Chrysler Freeway, the future Interstate 75, started to carve northward, connecting downtown to the swelling suburbs above 8 Mile. Each year brought new stretches of concrete, funded by federal dollars. 90 cents out of every construction dollar came from Washington after 1956. The city's old street grid, built for trolleys and foot traffic, was split by ramps and overpasses designed for cars fleeing downtown. Mortgage records from the 1950s and the 1960s show the effect. FHA and VA loans flowed into the suburbs at rates 10 times higher than in Detroit's older neighborhoods. New homes, new schools, and new shopping centers followed the money. For families with access to these loans, the path was clear: move out, buy in, and leave the city's crowded blocks behind. By 1970, Detroit's population had dropped to 1.5 million, but the overall metro area kept growing. The city's tax base, once anchored in dense neighborhoods and bustling main streets, began to thin out. The highways did not just make it easier to leave, they made it harder for the city to hold on to its future. On Detroit's east side, the borders of Black Bottom were drawn in red ink. In the 1930s, federal appraisers from the Home Owners Loan Corporation walked block by block, filling out area description sheets that labeled neighborhoods like Black Bottom and Paradise Valley as D, hazardous. The reason was written in plain language: Negro concentration, undesirable racial mixture. These codes did not just describe the streets, they set the rules for who could build wealth and who was locked out. Banks and mortgage companies took their cue from those maps. If you lived in a redlined zone, it did not matter how well you kept up your house or paid your bills. FHA underwriters, following the federal manual, warned against lending where there was infiltration of inharmonious racial groups. For black families, a home loan was nearly impossible to get, and even home repairs could be out of reach. Instead, they faced high-interest land contracts with no equity and the constant threat of eviction. Meanwhile, FHA-backed mortgages flowed easily to the new white suburbs, Livonia, Warren, Dearborn, where restrictive covenants in the deeds made sure black buyers were kept out. A community organizer who grew up near Hastings Street remembers neighbors pooling cash to patch leaky roofs or fix a furnace because banks would not lend on a house marked D. She remembers watching the paint peel and the porches sag, not because people did not care, but because the system said they were not worth the risk. The cost was not just individual, it was collective. As property values in redline neighborhoods stagnated or fell, the city's tax base began to drain away. Schools, parks, and city services withered where credit was denied, while the suburbs built new schools and libraries with federally subsidized wealth. The lines on those HOLC maps became self-fulfilling. Where investment stopped, decline set in, and the city's fiscal foundation began to crack from the inside out. The damage was done long before the first factory closed its doors. Inside Detroit's factories, the first shock came quietly. By the early 1950s, the auto industry was already shrinking its payrolls, not by moving jobs overseas, but by replacing people with machines. Ford's automation division, launched in 1946, rolled out transfer machines and conveyor systems that could do in minutes what once took a crew all day. The Cleveland engine plant opened in 1951 and became a showcase, with automated lines, fewer hands, and more output. At the River Rouge complex, automated foundries and press shops cut the need for skilled labor. Powered hand tools and high-speed conveyors turned once specialized jobs into repetitive tasks, trimming headcounts without fanfare. Between 1950 and 1970, Detroit's auto manufacturing workforce dropped from just over 220,000 to under 100,000, even as American car sales soared. The jobs did not all leave at once. They vanished through retirements not replaced, layoffs after retooling, and new plants opened outside city limits. Dodge, Maine, once a dense hive of activity in Hamtramck, saw its workforce dwindle long before its closure in 1980. The Packard plant, once a symbol of Detroit's industrial might, became a symbol of abandonment as lines went dark and paychecks stopped. This is where the work vanished for entire neighborhoods. The real damage was not just the loss of factory shifts. Every job cut meant less spent at the corner store, fewer property taxes paid, and shrinking income for city services. As automation advanced, the city's fiscal math began to unravel. The payrolls that once powered Detroit's budget were shrinking from the inside, long before the headlines warned of collapse. That shrinking set the spiral in motion, and it became a self-reinforcing cycle that hollowed out streets, stores, and lives. By 2010, Detroit's population had dropped below 714,000, a plunge of more than 60% since its 1950 peak. The city that once rivaled Chicago and Los Angeles in size now struggled to fill entire neighborhoods. Empty houses lined block after block, their windows boarded or broken, grass growing waist-high where children once played. Fewer people meant fewer taxpayers, and City Hall's budget shrank with every moving truck that pulled away. The math was brutal. Schools closed, police precincts consolidated, fire stations went dark, trash piled up on curbs for weeks, streetlights flickered out and sometimes stayed that way. For families who remained, the fabric of daily life began to unravel. Waiting for an ambulance could take half an hour. Calls to 911 sometimes rang unanswered. In some neighborhoods, it felt as if the city had simply withdrawn, leaving residents to fend for themselves. The feedback loop was relentless. As services eroded, more people left. As more people left, the city's ability to provide even basic services collapsed further. The infrastructure, roads, sewers, water mains, had been built for nearly 2 million. Maintaining it for a fraction of that number became impossible. Budget gaps widened into chasms. The fiscal crisis was visible not just on balance sheets, but in the daily struggle to keep the lights on and the streets safe. The 1967 uprising turned a slow bleed into a flood. 43 people died in 5 days of violence and fire. Insurance companies stopped writing new policies in many neighborhoods. Businesses shuttered, and the pace of outmigration surged. Fear and frustration replaced the old optimism. The city's institutions, its schools, OCOs, police, and public works were left fighting a losing battle against vacancy and decay. In the eyes of many, Detroit's decline was no longer a distant threat. It was the new reality. By 2013, Detroit's financial crisis had reached a breaking point. The city faced $18 billion in long-term obligations, including debt, pensions, and retiree health care, while basic services were stretched to the limit. Years of budget gaps, controversial borrowing, and political scandal had left the city's finances in freefall. The Kilpatrick administration's legacy hung over City Hall, with corruption trials, deferred pension payments, and a series of risky bond deals that only deepened the hole. In March, Michigan's governor appointed bankruptcy attorney Kevin Orr as Detroit's emergency manager. Orr was handed sweeping powers. He could override elected officials, break contracts, and make decisions that would shape the city's future for decades. 4 months later, Orr filed for Chapter 9 bankruptcy protection, the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. The court battle drew national attention. Bondholders, unions, and retirees all lined up to defend their claims. The numbers were staggering, but the human stakes were even higher. Police and firefighters faced pension cuts, city workers feared for their jobs, and residents worried about losing what little was left of city services. In the end, bankruptcy did not cause Detroit's collapse. It was the official say-so stamp on a long, painful unraveling. Decades of decline finally made undeniable in a federal courtroom. Downtown Detroit hums with new energy. Since the bankruptcy, private investors have poured billions into the city's core. Dan Gilbert's companies alone have bought more than 100 buildings and garages, covering over 18 million square feet of real estate. Office towers, once half empty, now house tech startups, banks, and restaurants. Sidewalks near Campus Martius fill with workers and visitors. In this small footprint, property values and rents have climbed, and new construction cranes dot the skyline. But outside the core, a different city persists. The Detroit Land Bank Authority manages close to 100,000 lots and houses, about a third of all parcels, spread across neighborhoods where vacancy and abandonment remain the norm. On some blocks, more land is owned by the land bank than by actual residents. Many houses stand boarded or burned, waiting for demolition or a buyer that may never come. City services, from trash pickup to park repairs and streetlights, still lag far behind downtown's polished surface. The divide is stark. In just a few square miles, private capital has rebuilt the skyline. In the neighborhoods, public agencies hold tens of thousands of empty lots, reminders of the population that left. Detroit's comeback is real for some, but for many, the wait continues. Detroit's story is a warning. Cities built on single industries and exclusionary policies can unravel no matter how powerful they seem. Today, over 40% of Detroit's land sits vacant, while downtown booms, proof that collapse is a process, not a moment. As new cities rise on fragile foundations, the real risk isn't sudden disaster, but slow neglect. Which city will ignore the signs next? Share your thoughts below.